The maid's rough-hewn hands cradled his daughter's tear-stained face with more tenderness than his fiancée's silk gloves ever had. And from behind the hidden panel in the nursery wall, the Duke realized he'd been blind to what mattered most. Welcome, my beloved. Before we dive into the whole story, please click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as beautiful as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. Rupert Fitzwilliam hadn't meant to become the sort of man who spied on his own household. 3 years of widowhood and loneliness had turned him into someone he barely recognized. A duke who questioned everything, trusted nothing, and second-guessed every decision involving his children. The concealed passageways threading through Ravenshire Estate's ancient walls had been his childhood playground, forgotten, until desperation drove him back into their dusty embrace. Now, pressed against cold stone, Lady Lavinia Beaumont stood in the nursery's afternoon light, her cream silk gown catching the sun like spun gold. She was breathtaking, the kind of beauty that made men stumble over their words and women whisper behind their fans. When Rupert proposed 2 months ago, half of London had congratulated him on his excellent taste. The other half had envied him. Really, Hugh, Lavinia's voice dripped honey laced with arsenic. Must you be so clumsy? Look at what you've done to my dress. The boy, barely 3 years old, stood frozen. A wooden horse clutched in his pudgy hands. A dark stain spread across Lavinia's hem where he'd apparently spilled something. Hugh's bottom lip quivered. I'm sorry, my lady. Of course you didn't mean it. Lavinia's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. You never mean anything, do you? Just like you didn't mean to be born and take your mother away from your father. Rupert's chest constricted. Behind the wall, his breath came in shallow gasps. Hugh's face crumpled. Mama? Yes, your mama. Dead because of you. Lavinia examined her ruined hem with theatrical disgust. That sometimes he can't bear to look at you because you remind him of what he lost. It wasn't true. God! It wasn't true. Rupert had said he couldn't look at them without seeing Marguerite. Not that he couldn't bear the sight of them. The distinction felt crucial. Massive. Like the difference between love and indifference. Millicent, Hugh's sister, crept forward from her corner where she'd been drawing. Please don't be cross with Hugh, my lady. He's just small. Lavinia's gaze swung toward the little girl like a predator spotting easier prey. And you. Good heavens, child. Must you always look so dreadfully plain? Thank goodness your father has money. You'll need every penny of your dowry to find a husband willing to overlook that face. Millicent's hand drifted to her cheek, as if she could feel the ugliness Lavinia described. Her drawings scattered across the floor, vibrant with childish joy, suddenly seemed to mock her. Where was Mabel? Rupert's eyes searched frantically through the narrow gap. There, in the corner, making herself impossibly small, her little arm pressed against her body in a way that suggested pain. The bruises. He'd noticed them yesterday, purple shadows on Mabel's skin that Lavinia had explained away with talk of clumsy tumbles and childhood accidents. But now, watching his fiancée's cold smile, Rupert understood exactly where those bruises had come from. The nursery door opened. Jane Wycliffe entered with a tea tray, her plain gray dress and white apron marking her as firmly below stairs. She was unremarkable in the way servants were trained to be forgettable, functional, practically invisible. Rupert had signed her employment papers 6 weeks ago without really looking at her face. But the children's reaction was anything but unremarkable. Jane! Mabel shot from her corner, like a cannonball, all pain forgotten, and crashed into the maid's skirts with desperate relief. Hugh abandoned his wooden horse and ran to her, tears streaming down his round cheeks. Millicent gathered her drawings and pressed them into Jane's free hand, like offerings at an altar. Jane set down the tea tray and sank to her knees, a gesture no proper servant would make, not in front of Lady Lavinia, and gathered all three children into her arms. "Hush now," she murmured, her voice low and warm. Lavinia's expression curdled. "Really, Wycliffe, there's no need for such dramatics. The children were perfectly fine before you arrived." "Were they, my lady?" Jane's tone remained respectful, but something steel-edged lurked beneath the surface. She gently touched Mabel's arm, and the child winced. "Mabel, sweetheart, does this hurt?" Mabel nodded, lip trembling. "She fell," Lavinia said quickly. "Clumsy thing tripped over her own feet." Jane's eyes, Rupert could see them now. Really see them. And they were remarkable. A clear gray that missed nothing. Met Lavinia's, without flinching. Strange how she keeps falling in the same places. The air crackled with tension. Lavinia drew herself up to her full height, every inch the aristocrat addressing an inferior. "You forget yourself, Wycliffe. I am to be mistress of this house. Duchess of Ravenshire. You would do well to remember your place." "My place," Jane said softly, still holding the children, "is wherever these little ones need me to be." Rupert's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd arranged this charade, the fake departure, the hidden observation to catch Lavinia, showing her true colors. Mission accomplished. He'd seen enough to break their engagement 10 times over. But he hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected to see love so fierce and unguarded on a servant's face. Hadn't expected his children to cling to a housemaid with more trust than they'd ever shown their future stepmother. Hadn't expected to feel his carefully constructed walls 3 years of grief and duty and emotional numbness begin to crack. Jane knew she'd overstepped the moment the words left her mouth. 6 weeks of biting her tongue, of watching Lady Lavinia torment these innocent children, had finally broken something inside her. The carefully constructed facade of Jane Wycliffe, obedient undermaid, crumbled like week-old bread. Lavinia's face flushed crimson. "How dare you speak to me in such a manner? I'll have you dismissed without references. You'll be begging in the streets by nightfall. Then I'll beg." Jane's voice didn't waver. She kept the children close, feeling their small bodies pressed against hers. "But I won't stand silent while you hurt them." "Hurt them?" Lavinia laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "I'm preparing them for the real world. The sooner they understand their inadequacies, the better. Hugh is weak. Millicent is plain. And Mabel is far too wild for a girl of quality." Hugh's fingers dug into Jane's sleeve. She could feel him shaking. "They're 3 years old," Jane said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "They're children who lost their mother and desperately need kindness. What they need is discipline." Lavinia smoothed her ruined skirts, something their father clearly failed to provide. "But once we're married, that will change. His Grace has given me complete authority over the nursery." The words hit Jane like a fist to the stomach. Complete authority. She imagined Lavinia as Duchess, with no one to stop her cruelty, these beautiful children withering under her care like flowers denied sunlight. "Miss Jane," Mabel whispered against her shoulder. "Don't let her send you away. Please." Jane's throat tightened. She'd promised herself she wouldn't get attached, couldn't afford to. But somewhere between Hugh's tentative smiles and Millicent's secret drawings and Mabel's endless chatter, these children had burrowed into her heart like seeds taking root. "I won't leave you," Jane promised, knowing it might be a lie. Knowing Lavinia could dismiss her with a snap of her fingers. Lavinia's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that. When His Grace returns tomorrow, I'll inform him of your insubordination, your inappropriate attachment to his children." The way you've undermined my authority. Tomorrow. The Duke was supposedly visiting his northern estates. Wouldn't return until then. Jane had perhaps 24 hours before her entire world collapsed. Do what you must, my lady. Jane stood, still holding Mabel, and took Hugh and Millicent's hands. But until then, these children are going for a walk in the gardens. The fresh air will do them good. She didn't wait for permission. Didn't look back as she guided the triplets toward the door, half expecting Lavinia to physically block their path. But the lady simply stood there. Fury radiating from her like heat from a stove. You'll regret this, Lavinia called after them. I'll make certain of it. Jane believed her. The afternoon sun felt like absolution as they stepped into the garden. The children clung to her hands, silent at first, as if afraid their voices might summon Lavinia from the house. Only when they reached the old oak tree at the garden's far corner did they begin to relax. Will Papa really let her send you away? Hugh asked, his voice small. Jane knelt in the grass, heedless of the stains on her uniform. I don't know, sweetheart. But whatever happens, I need you to remember something. She looked at each of them in turn. You are not weak. You are not plain. You are not too wild. You are brave and clever and absolutely perfect exactly as you are. Millicent's eyes filled with tears. Lady Lavinia says Papa can't bear to look at us. Is that true? The question pierced Jane's heart. She thought of the Duke distant, preoccupied, but not cruel. She'd seen him sometimes, watching his children from doorways, his expression unreadable. Grief, she'd thought. Not disgust, but how could she be certain? Your father loves you, Jane said, praying it was true. Sometimes grown-ups get lost in their sadness and forget to show it. But that doesn't mean the love isn't there. Do you love us? Mabel asked suddenly. The question hung in the air between them. Jane knew the answer was dangerous. Love made you vulnerable. Love gave others power to hurt you. She'd learned that when her father died, when her cousins stole everything, when her mother faded away from heartbreak and poverty. But looking at these three small faces, so desperate for affection, Jane couldn't lie. Yes, she whispered. I love you very much. Hugh threw his arms around her neck. Millicent pressed her drawings into Jane's lap like precious gifts. Mabel's face split into a grin that rivaled the sun. And behind the hedge, invisible in the shadows, Rupert Fitzwilliam felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. He'd heard everything. Lavinia's venom, Jane's defiance, his children's desperate questions, and that final, devastating confession, I love you very much. 4 words that changed everything. Rupert stepped back from his hiding place, his mind racing. He had until tomorrow, until he supposedly returned from his journey to decide his next move. Breaking the engagement would cause a scandal. Lavinia's family was powerful, well-connected. They'd spread rumors, paint him as a jilt, question his judgment. But watching Jane hold his children, seeing the trust in their eyes, Rupert realized he didn't give a damn about scandal. He'd been so focused on duty, on finding a suitable mother, a woman of proper breeding, that he'd forgotten what actually mattered. Not bloodlines or social standing, but kindness, love, the fierce protectiveness in Jane's eyes when she'd faced down Lavinia. Tomorrow, when he returned, he'd end his engagement. But tonight, he'd keep watching. Keep learning about the woman who'd stolen his children's hearts and, possibly, his own. The hidden passageways became Rupert's obsession. He'd spent years avoiding these corridors, these dusty relics of childhood adventure. But now, they offered him something precious. Truth. He watched Jane give the children their supper, simple bread and butter. Fruit cut into shapes that made them laugh. He watched her read them stories, doing funny voices that had Hugh giggling until he hiccuped. He watched her tuck them into bed, singing a lullaby in a voice that cracked with emotion. And he watched Lavinia, too. Saw her retreat to the guest chambers and complain to her lady's maid about those insufferable brats and that insolent servant girl. The one she'd use when he returned, perfecting her mask. How had he been so blind? Near midnight, Rupert emerged from the passages into his study. His steward, Mr. Pembroke, no relation to any forbidden names, sat waiting with correspondence that needed attention. "Your Grace." Pembroke looked up, startled. "I thought you'd retired. Couldn't sleep." Rupert poured himself brandy with shaking hands. "Pembroke, tell me honestly, what do you think of Lady Lavinia?" The steward's expression went carefully neutral. "It's not my place to—" "Please," Rupert's voice cracked. Pembroke sighed. "The staff is concerned, Your Grace, about her treatment of the children, and particularly about what will happen to Miss Wycliffe after the wedding." Wycliffe. Rupert tested the name on his tongue. "Tell me about her." "She came 6 weeks ago with excellent references. Works harder than anyone in the household. The children adore her." Pembroke hesitated. "There's something unusual about her, though. The way she speaks sometimes. Her hands." "Her hands? They're rough now, but Mrs. Crawford, the housekeeper, noticed calluses forming in strange places, like someone not accustomed to manual labor. And once, she caught Wycliffe reading in the servants' hall. Not just reading, but reading French poetry." "French poetry." Rupert's interest sharpened. "Has anyone investigated her background?" The references checked out. "Family in Northumberland," she said. "But—" Pembroke trailed off. "But? Crawford has a cousin who worked for the Baron of Wycliffe. Said his daughter vanished 2 years ago, after the old Baron died. Same first name as our undermaid. Same age. But surely, it couldn't be the same person," Rupert finished quietly. "A baron's daughter, working as a servant in his house, hiding in plain sight." The pieces clicked together. Her educated speech, her inadvertent grace, the way she carried herself when she forgot to slouch. Lady Jane Wycliffe. Fallen from grace, stripped of everything, reduced to scrubbing floors, and loving his children with a devotion no titled lady could match. Rupert's chest tightened. "Thank you, Pembroke. That will be all." After the steward left, Rupert returned to the passages. He told himself he was simply continuing his observation, gathering evidence to justify breaking his engagement. But truthfully, he couldn't stay away. He found Jane in the servants' quarters, a cramped room she shared with 2 other maids. They were asleep, but she sat by candlelight, mending one of Millicent's dresses. Her needle moved with practiced efficiency, and tears streamed silently down her cheeks. Rupert's hand pressed against the wall separating them. He wanted to burst through, to comfort her, to thank her for loving his children, when he'd been too broken to do it properly. But he remained frozen, watching her cry, and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. This woman, this brave, selfless, remarkable woman deserved so much more than the life she'd been dealt. And tomorrow, when he returned, he'd make certain she got it. Morning arrived too quickly. Jane woke before dawn, as always, her body conditioned to the rhythms of servitude. Her eyes felt gritty from crying, but there was no time for weakness. Work waited. She scrubbed floors in the entrance hall as the household stirred to life. Soon, the Duke would return. Soon, Lavinia would make good on her threats. Jane had perhaps hours left in this house. Hours left with Hugh and Millicent and Mabel. The thought made her hands shake so badly she had to stop scrubbing. Wycliffe. Mrs. Crawford's voice made her jump. The housekeeper stood over her, expression unreadable. His Grace has returned early. Requests your presence in his study. Immediately. Jane's stomach dropped. Early. Now, girl. Crawford's tone wasn't unkind, but it brooked no argument. Jane stood on trembling legs. This was it. Lavinia had gotten to him somehow. Sent word ahead. Jane would be dismissed, cast out with nothing, and those children would be left to Lavinia's mercy. The walk to the Duke's study felt like a march to the gallows. She knocked, barely breathing. Enter. Rupert sat behind his massive desk, looking every inch the Duke. His cravat was perfectly tied, his coat immaculate, his expression stern. Jane dropped into a curtsy so deep her knees protested. Your Grace. I apologize for whatever Lady Lavinia told you. I spoke out of turn. Your Grace. But the children, are you Lady Jane Wycliffe? He interrupted. Daughter of Baron Wycliffe of Northumberland? The world tilted. Jane's vision swam. He knew. God help her. He knew. Her voice failed. There was no point lying. Yes, Your Grace. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have hired a penniless baron's daughter to scrub your floors? The words came out sharper than intended. I needed work. I needed to survive. My title died with my father. Rupert studied her with unnerving intensity. You deceived me. Yes. Jane lifted her chin, finding some scrap of pride beneath her terror. I deceived you, just as Lady Lavinia deceives you. The difference is, I did it to feed myself, not to torture your children. The words hung between them like a thrown gauntlet. Rupert's expression didn't change. Tell me what you've witnessed. Tell. So Jane did. Everything. The pinches and cruel words, the bruises on Mabel's arms, the way Lavinia told Hugh his birth killed his mother, the comments about Millicent being plain. She'd expected to be interrupted, dismissed. But Rupert simply listened, his jaw growing tighter with each revelation. When she finished, silence filled the study like smoke. I saw it all. Rupert finally said, I never left for the northern estates. I've been hiding in the walls, watching, because I suspected but couldn't prove. He stood abruptly. You defended my children. You risked everything for them. They deserve defending. Yes. Something raw flickered across his face. Your Grace. No. He raised a hand. I buried myself in grief and let strangers raise my children. I nearly married a woman who would have destroyed them. But you, he moved around the desk, standing closer than propriety allowed. You loved them when no one else would. Jane's throat closed. What will you do? First, I'll end my engagement to Lady Lavinia. Second, I'll ensure she never works her poison on another child. Her family's influence won't protect her from the truth. Your Grace, you're already employing me. Not as a maid. Rupert's voice dropped. As governess to my children. Proper salary, proper quarters, proper respect. They need you, Lady Jane. And he paused, seemingly surprised by his own words. I need someone I can trust. Jane's heart hammered. Governess. A respectable position. A chance to stay with the children she loved. But something in his tone suggested more. Something that made her pulse race with dangerous hope. I accept, she whispered. Lavinia's fury could have melted steel. She stood in the drawing room, face mottled with rage, as Rupert calmly explained that their engagement was terminated. "You cannot be serious. My father will. Your father will accept my decision, or I'll share what I witnessed with every influential family in London." Rupert's voice remained dangerously quiet. "Your treatment of my children was unconscionable." "Treatment? I was disciplining them, preparing them for society's expectations." Lavinia's hands clenched into fists. "This is about that servant, isn't it? That presumptuous little maid who doesn't know her place. Miss Wycliffe knows her place perfectly. It's beside my children, caring for them, loving them. Something you proved incapable of doing. Loving them?" Lavinia laughed bitterly. "You're a fool, Rupert. She's using them to get to you. Can't you see? A fallen noblewoman playing the saint, worming her way into your affections." "Enough." The single word cracked like a whip. "You will leave Ravenshire Estate within the hour, and if you speak one word against Miss Wycliffe or my children, I will ensure your reputation is destroyed so thoroughly that no respectable family will receive you." Lavinia's mouth opened and closed like a gasping fish. "You'll regret this. When society learns you jilted me for a housemaid." "Let them talk." Rupert moved to the door, opening it. "Society's opinion means nothing compared to my children's well-being." After Lavinia departed in a storm of silk and threats, Rupert found himself outside the nursery. Through the door, he heard Jane reading to the children, her voice animated, bringing characters to life. Hugh's delighted laughter punctuated the story. When had he last heard his son laugh like that? Rupert knocked softly. The reading stopped. "Come in," Jane called. He entered to find all three children cuddled around Jane on the window seat, a storybook open across their laps. They looked up at him with identical wary expressions, as if afraid he'd shatter their happiness. "Papa?" Mabel's voice was tiny. "Are you cross?" Rupert's heart broke. His own children, afraid of him. He crossed the room and knelt before them, bringing himself to their level. "No, sweetheart. I'm not cross. I'm—" His voice caught. "I'm sorry. For being distant. For not protecting you from Lady Lavinia. For failing to see what was right in front of me." Hugh tentatively touched Rupert's shoulder. "You're not going to marry her?" "No. Lady Lavinia won't be returning." The relief on their faces made Rupert want to weep. Millicent clutched her, drawing tighter. "Will Jane stay?" "If she wishes to." Rupert looked at Jane, who met his gaze with something like wonder. "I've asked her to be your governess." "Forever?" Mabel demanded. "For as long as she'll have us," Rupert said quietly, still looking at Jane. The children erupted in celebration, throwing themselves at Jane with such force she nearly tumbled from the window seat. Their joy was pure, uncomplicated by the adult tensions swirling beneath the surface. But Rupert saw the tear tracking down Jane's cheek, saw the way her hand shook as she held his children. And he understood, suddenly, that she'd been starving for family just as much as they had. "Thank you," Jane mouthed over the children's heads. Rupert nodded, his throat too tight for words. He'd saved his children from Lavinia's cruelty. But watching Jane surrounded by their happiness, he suspected she might be saving all of them from something far worse: loneliness. 3 weeks passed like a dream. Jane moved into the governess's quarters, spacious rooms with proper furniture and windows overlooking the gardens. She woke each morning still half expecting to find herself back in the servants' cramped quarters. But reality persisted. She was governess now, respected, valued. The children flourished under her care. Hugh's laughter became commonplace. Millicent's drawings covered every surface. Encouraged, rather than hidden. Mabel's spirit returned in full force. her stubbornness now channeled into fierce loyalty to Jane. And Rupert. Rupert found himself seeking excuses to visit the nursery, to watch Jane teach the children their letters, to hear her patient explanations when Hugh struggled with numbers, to see how she never raised her voice, never used shame as a weapon, but instead guided with gentle encouragement. He fell in love with her teaching first, then her kindness, then the way she laughed at Mabel's terrible jokes, then everything else. It terrified him. "You're staring again," Pembroke observed one afternoon as Rupert stood in his study window, ostensibly reviewing accounts but actually watching Jane and the children in the garden. "I'm observing their lessons." Is that what we're calling it?" Pembroke's tone was dry. "Your Grace, forgive my boldness, but the entire household has noticed. You're in love with her." Rupert's hands tightened on the windowsill. "That's impossible. I buried love with Marguerite." "Shaw, did you? Or did you bury yourself and mistake numbness for grief's end?" Pembroke set down his pen. "Marguerite wouldn't have wanted you to be alone forever." Part 1. It's only been 3 years. 3 years of being dead to your children. Dead to yourself. Pembroke's voice gentled. "Miss Wycliffe brought you back to life. Don't waste it." Outside, Jane was showing Millicent how to identify different flowers. The little girl's face glowed with concentration. Hugh practiced his letters on a slate, while Mabel gathered stones for some elaborate game. They looked like a family. They felt like his family. "She's a baron's daughter working as governess," Rupert said quietly. "Society already whispers about my broken engagement. If I court her now, they'll crucify us both." "Since when do you care about society's opinion?" "Since never," Rupert realized. He'd defied expectations by jilting Lavinia. His children's happiness had mattered more than scandal. Why should his own happiness be different? But there was another consideration. What if she doesn't feel the same? She works for me. Any advance I make puts her in an impossible position. Pembroke chuckled. "Your Grace, with respect, you're a brilliant duke, but a blind fool. The way she looks at you when you enter a room? She's in love with you too. Was she?" Rupert replayed their interactions, searching for signs. The way her breath caught when their hands accidentally touched. How her eyes followed him when she thought he wasn't looking. The soft expression that crossed her face when he played with the children. Hope, dangerous and exhilarating, bloomed in his chest. That evening, after the children were asleep, Rupert found Jane in the library. She sat curled in a chair, a habit from her noble upbringing. He suspected reading by lamplight. She looked up at his entrance, a smile lighting her face. "Your Grace, I didn't expect to see you tonight. I couldn't sleep." Rupert closed the door behind him. "Propriety be damned. Jane, may I call you Jane?" "Of course." Her smile turned uncertain. "Is something wrong?" Everything was wrong and right simultaneously. Rupert crossed to her chair, then stopped, suddenly unsure. He'd commanded armies of servants, navigated parliament, managed vast estates. But asking this woman, this remarkable, brave, selfless woman, how she felt about him seemed impossibly difficult. "I need to tell you something," he began. "When Marguerite died, I thought I died too. For 3 years, I've been a ghost in my own life. I failed my children, failed myself. But then you arrived. And you," his voice roughened, "you reminded me what it means to live, to love, to hope." Jane's book tumbled from her lap, forgotten. She stood slowly, her eyes wide. "Your Grace." Rupert, Please call me Rupert. Rupert. His name on her lips sounded like a prayer. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm in love with you. The words came easier than he'd imagined. I'm saying I watch you with my children and see the mother they deserve. I'm saying that when you smile, the whole house feels brighter. I'm saying, Jane kissed him. It was brief, chaste, but it silenced every doubt in Rupert's mind. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, her expression mortified. I'm sorry. That was completely inappropriate. I shouldn't have. Now Rupert kissed her. Properly this time, pouring 3 weeks of longing into the gesture. Jane's hands came up to his chest, then slid around his neck, pulling him closer. She tasted like hope and home, and everything he'd thought he'd lost forever. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jane laughed. I love you too, she whispered. I've been terrified to admit it. I'm your employee. A fallen noblewoman. I have nothing to offer. You have everything I need. Rupert cupped her face in his hands. You have my children's love, my own heart. That's more than enough. The proposal happened 3 months later, after careful courtship that satisfied even the most rigid social observers. Rupert courted Jane properly chaperoned visits. Flowers. Declarations made in appropriate settings. But everyone who mattered already knew the truth. They were desperately, completely in love. The children, of course, were ecstatic. Does this mean Jane will be our mama? Mabel asked, when Rupert announced his intentions. If she accepts my proposal, yes. She has to accept, Hugh declared, with the absolute certainty of childhood. She loves us. She does, Rupert agreed. But love means giving someone a choice. We can't force her to marry me. Millicent, wise beyond her years, looked at him seriously. Papa, you know she'll say yes. She looks at you the way you look at her. Oh? And how is that? Like you've found something precious you thought you'd lost forever. Rupert's throat tightened. When had his daughter become so perceptive? The actual proposal took place in the garden beneath the old oak tree where Jane had first comforted the children. Rupert arranged everything perfectly, or tried to. The children insisted on helping, which meant slightly wilted flowers, a blanket with juice stains, and 3 small faces peeking from behind the hedge, failing spectacularly at hiding. Jane laughed when she saw them. Subtle. They insisted. Rupert took her hands, suddenly nervous despite months of certainty. Jane Wycliffe, I need to ask you something. If it's whether Mabel can have a puppy, I think we should discuss. Will you marry me? The words tumbled out inelegantly. Not at all the practiced speech he'd rehearsed. But Jane's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded frantically. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. The children erupted from their hiding place, cheering. Rupert slid his mother's ring onto Jane's finger. He'd saved it for this moment, knowing Marguerite would have approved and kissed her while their children danced around them. We're getting a mama, Mabel sang. We're getting a mama. You already had me, Jane laughed through her tears. But now it's official, Hugh said solemnly. Now you can't leave. Jane knelt in the grass, gathering all 3 children close. I was never leaving. Not then, not now, not ever. You're stuck with me forever. Promise? Millicent whispered. I promise. Watching them, his family, complete at last, Rupert felt the final pieces of his broken heart slot back into place. Marguerite would always hold part of him, but Jane had shown him that hearts could grow, that there was room for new love without diminishing the old. Thank you, he told her later, after the children were asleep. They sat in the drawing room, Jane's hand tucked in his, the ring glinting in candlelight. For loving them. For loving me. for being brave enough to defy every social convention. I didn't have much choice. Jane leaned against his shoulder. You, Fitzwilliams, are apparently irresistible. Does that include the short, stubborn one who insists on collecting rocks? Especially her. Rupert pressed a kiss to Jane's hair. Let them. Jane's voice was fierce. I've been an outcast before. I've survived worse than gossip. As long as I have you and the children, society can think whatever it pleases. You're remarkable. I'm practical. But she smiled. And I'm home. Finally. Blessedly. Home. The wedding took place in Ravenshire's private chapel. A small affair with only close friends and household staff attending. Rupert had offered Jane a grand London wedding, but she'd declined. I don't need society's approval, she'd said. I just need you. So they married quietly, the children standing as attendants, Mrs. Crawford crying into her handkerchief, Pembroke beaming like a proud father. Jane wore a simple cream gown, no elaborate trousseau, no jewels beyond Marguerite's ring, and looked more beautiful than any duchess Rupert had ever seen. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, the children cheered so loudly that several guests laughed. Rupert kissed his new wife thoroughly, propriety abandoned, and felt years of loneliness finally, blessedly end. The wedding breakfast was chaos. Mabel spilled punch on her dress. Hugh ate too much cake and got sticky fingers on everything. Millicent presented Jane with a drawing of their new family stick figures, holding hands beneath a smiling sun that made the new Duchess cry. Happy tears, Jane assured the worried children. These are happy tears. Later, as evening shadows lengthened, Rupert found Jane in the nursery. She was tucking the children into bed, singing the lullaby they'd come to expect. Her wedding gown was rumpled, her hair falling from its pins, and she'd never looked more perfect. You're supposed to be at our wedding supper, Rupert said from the doorway. I needed to say goodnight first. Jane kissed each small forehead. Tomorrow they'll wake up with a new mama. I wanted their last night to feel normal. Mabel's eyes were already drifting closed. You've been our mama for ages, Jane. Duchess Mama now, Hugh corrected sleepily. Just Mama is fine, Jane whispered. Millicent clutched her hand. Are you going to live with us forever and ever? Forever and ever, Jane promised. No more being scared. No more wondering if I'll leave. This is my home now, with you. The children smiled and surrendered to sleep. Rupert waited while Jane extinguished the lamps, then took her hand and led her from the nursery. Their own chambers waited, but neither felt rushed. They walked through Ravenshire's halls together, this man who'd lost everything, and this woman who'd survived losing everything. Somewhere along the way, in a journey measured in bruises and tears and desperate defiance, they'd found each other. Do you miss your old life? Rupert asked quietly. The one before your father died? Jane considered this. Sometimes I miss my mother, the security of knowing where I belonged. But that life would have given me a suitable marriage to a suitable man, and I would have been suitably miserable. She squeezed his hand. This life. Our life is so much better. Even the hard parts were worth it because they led me here. To me. To you. To the children. To family. Jane stopped walking and turned to face him fully. I was a baron's daughter who lost everything, but I gained something infinitely more valuable. People who love me, not for my title or dowry, but for who I am. Who you are is extraordinary. Who I am is your wife. Jane smiled. And their mother. And finally, after so much loss and fear and loneliness, I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Rupert pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. Tomorrow, society might gossip, Critics might sneer at the Duke, who married his children's governess. But tonight, holding his wife in his arms with his sleeping children safe upstairs, Rupert didn't care about any of it. He'd hidden behind walls to test his fiancée's true nature, and in doing so, he'd discovered something far more precious. A woman who loved without conditions, who fought for those weaker than herself, who turned a house into a home. "I love you," he murmured against her temple. "I love you too." Jane pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "Thank you for seeing me, for trusting me with your children, for giving me a family when I thought I'd lost everything." "Thank you for saving us," Rupert replied. "All of us. We were drowning in grief, and you taught us how to live again." They stood together in the hallway, not quite ready to leave this moment. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges. But tonight, they had won something precious. Love, family, and the fierce joy of belonging. "Shall we?" Rupert gestured toward their chambers. Jane took his arm, her smile radiant. "Lead the way, Your Grace." "Rupert," he corrected. "Always Rupert." "Always," Jane agreed. 2 years later, Ravenshire Estate had transformed. Laughter echoed through halls, once silent with grief. Children's drawings covered study walls. The nursery housed not just 3 children, but 4 baby Margaret, named for Marguerite, slept peacefully in her cradle while her older siblings played nearby. Jane sat in the garden, Margaret in her arms, watching Rupert teach Hugh to fence. The boy was 5 now, confident and joyful, with none of the fear that had once made him flinch. Millicent sketched nearby, her talent developing under a proper art tutor's guidance. And Mabel, stubborn, fierce, Mabel was currently arguing with the gardener about which flowers should go where, displaying leadership qualities that made Jane smile. "You're thinking something," Rupert observed, settling beside her after Hugh ran off to practice his moves on imaginary opponents. "I'm thinking how different everything is." Jane adjusted the baby in her arms. "How different I am. 2 years ago, I was scrubbing floors and hiding my identity. Now I'm a duchess with 4 children, and a husband I adore. Sometimes it feels like a dream. If it's a dream, don't wake up." Rupert kissed her temple. "I need you too much." "We need you too, Papa," Mabel called, apparently finished terrorizing the gardener. "Come see. I made the flowers spell family." It was a generous interpretation. The flowers mostly looked like colorful chaos, but Rupert dutifully admired his daughter's work while Jane laughed. That evening, with all children finally asleep, Jane found a letter waiting on her desk. It bore the seal of her cousin, the one who'd stolen her inheritance, and cast her out. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Lady Jane," it began stiffly, "I have heard of your marriage to the Duke of Ravenshire. I hope you will not hold past difficulties against me. Family should support family. After all, perhaps we might discuss." Jane didn't finish reading. She simply folded the letter and dropped it into the fire. Rupert found her watching it burn. "Your cousin? Trying to reconcile now that I'm a duchess." Jane's voice was remarkably calm. "Funny how family becomes important once you have something they want. What will you do?" "Nothing." Jane turned from the flames to face her husband. "He's not my family. You are. The children are. Mrs. Crawford and Pembroke and everyone who stood by me when I had nothing, they're my family. Blood doesn't make family. Love does." "Number." Rupert pulled her into his arms. "You're wise, Duchess Fitzwilliam." "I'm practical," she corrected, but she was smiling. "And I'm happy. That's more than enough revenge." Later, lying in bed with Rupert's arms around her, Jane reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd lost everything: title, fortune, security. She'd scrubbed floors and hidden her identity and been so desperate for survival that dignity became a luxury she couldn't afford. But in losing everything, she'd found what truly mattered. She'd found children who needed her fierce protection, a man whose broken heart matched her own, a love that grew from kindness rather than duty, a family built on choice rather than blood. "What are you thinking?" Rupert's voice was drowsy against her hair. "I'm thinking about the day I arrived at Ravenshire." Jane snuggled closer. How terrified I was. How certain I was that I'd lost everything that mattered. And now? Now I know I had to lose everything to find what actually mattered. She turned in his arms to face him. "You. The children. This life we've built. I wouldn't change a single moment of the journey, because it led me here. Even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts. They taught me what real strength looks like, what real love means." Jane kissed him softly. "They taught me that sometimes you have to hide in plain sight to discover your true self." Rupert held her closer. "I hid in walls to test a fiancé's character. Instead, I discovered yours. Best decision I ever made." "I... Second best," Jane corrected. "The best was breaking that engagement." "Fair point." Rupert laughed quietly. "Though I think we can both agree, the actual best decision was loving those children. Everything else followed from that." Jane thought of Hugh, finally confident and secure. Of Millicent, whose artwork now hung proudly throughout the house. Of Mabel, whose stubborn spirit no longer had to hide. Of baby Margaret, who would grow up knowing only love and safety. "Yes," she agreed. "Everything followed from that." Outside, Ravenshire Estate settled into peaceful night. In the nursery, 4 children slept soundly, protected and cherished. And in the ducal chambers, 2 people who'd both lost everything held each other close and counted themselves blessed beyond measure. Because sometimes love arrives in unexpected packages. Sometimes it wears a maid's uniform and rough hands that still remember how to be gentle. Sometimes it hides in walls, watching and learning and hoping. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love doesn't just heal old wounds. It writes entirely new stories. Stories of courage and redemption. Stories of children who learn to laugh again and adults who learn to live. Stories that begin with loss but end with family. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as beautiful and intriguing as you can ever imagine. So, do check it out. See you on the next one.